Welcome to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today I'm going to be doing predictions for the first playday of stage number 3 of NAL's 2022 season, final stage of the season. So we have a decent amount to work off of based on stage 1, stage 2, maybe even some of these teams played at the majors. But with last stage being super wild and with how many roster changes there were in the offseason, this is going to be a difficult one to predict, certainly early, and then depending on how close things are, maybe even later on in the stage, we'll see. But okay, here is the schedule. I guess I don't think I've done a video talking about this. I did like a post that showed it, so if you haven't seen it, feel free to take a gander. I mean, you don't really have to pause it. I'll be on this screen the whole video. But right, it is in fact today the first match is, so I need to finish recording this and post this a bit hastily, and then I suppose tomorrow before the games I'll have the second day predictions. But right, we're just covering the first day in this video. First game of the day, Oxygen versus Parabellum, and I think, was this the first game of last stage too? It was certainly on the first day, but it might be the first game back-to-back, which is a little bit interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the roster changes. 1 for Oxygen, 2 for Parabellum, and pretty drastic, I think, on both teams. So Oxygen getting rid of Laxing, picking up Sweater. So a little bit curious in terms of the roles, and then also this is the first time Oxygen has changed up their 3-man core of Foxay, Vertical, Laxing in a very long time. So you know, maybe they've made more changes in the past. Kino Yaga came on the roster, Dream and Sweater came on the Dream and Newers came on the roster at the same time, but now only one change, but perhaps changing a more significant player in that very, very long-standing integral piece of their puzzle. So we'll see how it works out for them. On the other hand, Parabellum getting rid of Gunner and Penguin, bringing in Asian and Doc. And I mean, Penguin, I guess, was perhaps the most integral team or integral player to this team in terms of their identity. So we'll see where they go from here. I don't know if it's necessarily going to negatively affect them. It might make things kind of weird for them early on because that was, I mean, their IGL, thus their most vocal player. So it could impact them in that way. If they have enough vocal players still, maybe it'll be fine. That seems to be the way a lot of teams are going in the current meta. But all things considered, I think Oxygen is the favorite here. Maybe not like a massive favorite. We'll see how Doc and Asian play in their debut. But yeah, I would say Oxygen is a higher tier team than Parabellum at the moment. And also, you know, less volatility. They only made one change versus Parabellum's too. So I think pretty safe bet for Oxygen, but I wouldn't be absolutely surprised if Parabellum won this, especially if Doc and or Asian pop off in the game. Okay, next up, Astralis versus Dark Zero. This is a rematch of the Charlotte Major Grand Finals, so not the most recent major, and Dark Zero wasn't at that major, and Astralis did quite bad at that major. So a lot of considerations here. Both of these teams, I guess, on a little bit of a downward trend, again, both of them in the grand finals of Charlotte, and once again, you know, Dark Zero not even make it to the major. Astralis, one of, if not just the worst performing team at the major, and within the league, Dark Zero went from 3rd place to 5th place. Astralis, 1st place both stages, but they got far fewer points in the 2nd stage. They definitely had to grind their way to that 1st place position. It was quite close. And I mean, 1st place is 1st place, but the league was very, very close. They weren't nearly as dominant as they were in stage 1, only losing a single game to Oxygen. I guess in terms of the head-to-head within the league, the last 2 stages, which are definitely the most important, Astralis is up 2-0 on Dark Zero. They beat them both times, but Dark Zero, I suppose, is... Oh, they have the grand final victory over them. So in terms of maps, if you count that and the NAL, it's 4-3 in favor of Astralis. So by all accounts, they're up in that regard. I suppose they took the most devastating loss to Dark Zero. You don't really want to lose a grand final to anybody. And who do I think is going to take this one? I think a lot of people are saying that Astralis is on a little bit of a downtrend. They don't expect them to do as good this stage. Maybe they'll get passed up, and I think a lot of that is maybe notes taken from what happened to them at the major. I think a lot of that was to do with maybe they underestimated their opponents, and also maybe they weren't as prepared for their opponents' play style, seeing as though they didn't get to play against any NA teams in their group. And I suppose at Charlotte they didn't either, but a little bit different of a situation. I think a little wilder group for them in Berlin than in Charlotte. So, and I also heard Space Station we're talking about in a video their tier list, which actually line up quite closely to my tier list. So I think, yeah, I think you can. I think there is a pretty objective judgment to be made about most of the teams coming in, and maybe they will defy those metrics. But we'll have to see. But yeah, they said that Dark Zero, but when they scrimmed them, I think they said before the major they were playing like perfectly, like incredibly. So on that basis, maybe I ought to go with them if they're playing really well, and the community sentiment is that Astralis is on a little bit of a fall off. But I mean, the record doesn't lie, and Astralis hasn't faltered out of first place this year yet in NAL. Will they get there a third time? It seems pretty unlikely. It's just really hard to do, and all these teams making roster changes coming for the crown. So I think I'm going to go with Dark Zero here. I originally was going to go with Astralis, but I don't know. Are they really going to get the 30-0 on Dark Zero? It seems kind of tough. And I guess these are two of the three teams that didn't make any roster changes facing off on the first day. Dark Zero, I guess, is just a little bit of a, I mean, maybe gut call is not even the right word, because originally I did want to go with Astralis, but now my gut is telling me Dark Zero. Maybe I was swayed by the opinions of Rampy and Lycan, but that's what I'm going to go with. Definitely this one could go either way. Should be a very exciting game. Not the game of the day, I would say, but we'll talk about that one in a minute. TSM versus Mirage. So the two worst teams in the league at the moment. TSM only 19 points over the course of 2 stages, and Mirage only 12 points, and a 9th place finish for TSM into an 8th place. So I suppose an improvement in that way. Double 10th place finishes for Mirage. You can't pick Mirage realistically. I mean, maybe if you're really enchanted by their roster changes, which I think is possible. It seems like pretty marked improvements they made to the roster overall. The roles seem a little bit questionable. Who is going to be the main voice is also questionable. I guess, a lot of teams just don't have a traditional IGL anymore, but I mean, I don't actually know how vocal any of the players are on Mirage. I'm sure they have some vocal players, they are pro players after all. I think more often than not, they are relatively vocal. And okay, so I think it's possible for Mirage to win this. People are also a little bit down on the TSM changes. Let's see if they can impress in the first game, Gasher and Snake. I also imagine that TSM's been playing with their pickups longer than Mirage. TSM and Mirage these were the last two to make roster changes, right? And so that maybe seems to indicate a similar amount of playtime, but TSM's had Snake all the way back since Gamers 8, and then Mirage, it seemed like sort of hasty changes. They didn't want to make changes, and then they decided they needed to, and then they did. So they're going to feel a little bit more thrown together. I'm going to go with TSM. I mean, I think there's just about every reason to pick TSM over Mirage, whether that be the current roster situation, how the offseason went down, just previous performances, everything. I mean, you just can't pick Mirage until they start actually getting solid wins. So I'll go with TSM, yeah. Xset versus Beast Coast, the traditional terrible teams in the league. They're not so terrible anymore. Xset is arguably the best team in the league at the moment. We'll see if that actually ends up happening, but I think they're perhaps the safest pick to make top 4 this stage. And then I guess I said they were bad because that's not the current iterations of the roster. But if you watch games from last stage, these were for sure the Mickey Mouse games, the Xset versus Beast Coast ones. Beast Coast not nearly as good as Xset, obviously. They haven't gone to either major, but they were very close to making either or both of the majors. And Xset no roster changes, Beast Coast 2 roster changes. Also, okay, so Xeno Ferda coming in for Sweater and Drip. Also keep in mind that for some amount of time, so certainly the first game at least, Mark the Shark will be subbing in for Ferda because Ferda has some sort of visa issue. So there is every reason in the world to pick Xset here. They've been the better team. They have the more stable roster. And then also the whole issues of Beast Coast not being able to play with their full 5. So yeah, definitely an easy pick for Xset here. And I think this would sort of be a heartbreaking loss if they were to take a loss here. I think probably this is the game that you'd lock in if you had to do one. I mean, maybe you're inclined to do TSM over Mirage, but I'd probably say Xset. Beast Coast defeating Xset would be the biggest surprise if it did happen. And then finally, Sonics versus SSG. So this is probably the game of the day, and for a couple of reasons, in fact. These two teams usually play pretty close. They're usually pretty exciting games. I don't know if we've seen a blowout from one of them on the other. And I think Sonics was the only team to take down SSG last year in Stage 3. SSG only took one single loss. It was to Sonics. And in Stage number 1, Sonics beat SSG when Sonics were quite bad. And then last stage, who actually won? I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was still Sonics. But was it SSG? I think it was Sonics. I can't quite remember. Anyways, and if we're talking about last year, that is a while ago. Different circumstances, different meta, all this stuff. Roster changes. Definitely more significant for Sonics. They made 2 versus SSG's 1, and also Super coming off the roster is probably the most impactful change that either of these rosters could make. The most long-standing member of the Sonics and sort of the player that built the current iteration of the roster. Yeah, all 4 of the players that joined him had sort of these pre-built synergies coming over from United, but he picked them up and he was their IGL, their leader. He made their strats and all of this stuff. So I imagine it's a pretty jarring change, him finally coming off the roster. He commented, Super did, on my previous video about how he said he was dropped, and I don't think it's like strictly incorrect terminology. Like, certainly he wasn't kicked, right? But he was, you know, if anybody leaves the roster, I think you can say they were dropped. I guess most technically correct, you would say he retired or just that he came off the roster. But okay, I mean, if you thought I was insane to say he was dropped, you know, it is what it is. Okay, so definitely the most impactful thing, and then Yeti also departing Sonics, going to SSG. So that's the other reason this is you know, perhaps a really exciting matchup to see on the very first day. I think a lot of people are saying that it's like a massive advantage for SSG because Yeti's going to know all their strats and how the players play. Maybe, I mean, certainly he'll know how not all of the players play, but 3 of the remaining players on Sonics play. But yeah, I'm sure Sonics are changing up their strategies, their playstyle, everything, because 2 roster changes is pretty drastic. Meta changes. We'll see if the meta changes like actually affect general strategy overall. The recoil changes maybe won't do that so much. It's just going to maybe swing a few gunfights if somebody controls their recoil a little bit better. But if the recoil and other changes are impactful enough to cause certain operators to not be played, other operators will then be played, and maybe that will cause different strategies. You know, if people stop playing Finka as much, if they start playing Ash or whatever other operator instead, then that might actually impact the way things are played. There probably will be fewer nades from under. There are just 2 fewer operators that have grenades, only 4 ops left. One of them's Glaz, so keep that in mind. You have to bring Knock, Yana, Sledge if you want nades. Those are all 3 really solid operators, but Yana even nerfed, no Gon 6, whatever. Okay, not really the subject of the video. Who do I want to go with here? Originally, I wanted to say Sonics. I feel like if maybe these teams hadn't made roster changes, it'd be a fairly easy Sonics pick with the performances last stage. SSG did outperform them in stage number 1. Sonics were weirdly bad, but they definitely bounced back. They got 2nd place last stage to SSG's 9th place, but still, that's only a 4-point gap. That's only 16 points versus 12 points. It was a very tight stage. I'm going to go with SSG. I'm going to trust what Rampy and Lycan said. They said they're looking pretty good, and that's not actually even the main reason. I guess it's mostly because it is the very first game day that Sonics will have their new roster. Super won't be playing. They'll have Geo and Gunner, so they might have a little bit of issues melding. I guess Gunner is filling in Yeti's roles, and then Geo, more or less, probably will fill in Super's roles. I'm guessing it's probably Kansan on the smoke instead of Geo. Geo's not so much of a smoke player, so he won't be slotting in exactly to what Super would normally play, but you know, I'm sure he'll be playing the Breach and whatnot. And then I guess Yeti won't slot into Sky's roles exactly. Maybe some iteration where Sky's was playing Flank Watch, he will match that. But I think the roles on SSG feel like they make sense, even if I'm not 100% sure where everyone goes. It seems like they have the roles filled out well enough, but Sonics do too. Okay, I'm going to go with SSG. And again, I think the main reason is that I expect a little bit of time for Sonics to settle into this new roster, even though I think it has so much potential. I think it's very possible to hit this game. And I don't know, I'm just going to put my faith in SSG. These are my 2 favorite teams, but I guess SSG was my OG original favorite team. So I'm going to rock with them, and we'll see what happens. Maybe I'll regret the pick, but I feel like it could certainly go either way. I expect this is sort of my game of the day. I think this one and the Astralis versus Dark Zero one should both be very exciting. So yeah, those are my picks, and I'll run them down the line one more time. Oxygen over Parabellum, Dark Zero over Astralis, TSM over Mirage, XZ over Beast Coast, and Space Station over Sonic. So if you have your own predictions, let me know. If you think any of mine are particularly insane, do let me know. But yeah, any questions, comments, concerns, corrections, suggestions, leave them below. A like and a subscription would also be appreciated. And I'll catch you guys in the next video.